Okay, if you're watching this video, you likely do too much volume. Now, if you are regular on my channel, you likely don't do too much volume because you've actually heard the real recommendations of how much volume you should be doing, and you now understand the real volume to do. If you're new to this, if you're new to me, or you came off something different, like maybe you came off my video talking about how bulking isn't necessary, or something else where it does sound like a bit of a controversial take, but I give full support and evidence backing actually what's going on, and I explain the whole entire scenario. But we're here to talk about volume and why you likely do too much of it, because truthfully, most people I see do too much of it. And I guess the first thing we need to really dive into is stimulus itself. Now, stimulus is really easy because you've got only real two parts, because the stimulus is the demand, and then the supply could be the energy, could be the protein, whatever. We don't have to worry about the demand. Well, not the demand, but we have to worry about the supply right now. We're focusing on the demand. That stimulus itself is going to be mechanical tension and motor unit recruitment. So mechanical tension is basically your muscles individually on the fiber level have sensors which can detect the amount of force they're resisting. And that happens in an individual scale. It doesn't matter how much of your bicep is doing what weight or what exercise, it doesn't matter. It's all about on that small singular muscle fiber level what the sensors inside of it are perceiving. And then motor unit recruitment, the other half of that equation, is the activator of the muscle fibers. So mechanical tension is the stimulus itself, but the other part of the stimulus is the multiplier of the stimulus, because it just means the amount of muscle fibers we're using. Because obviously, if we have a super great stimulus on an individual fiber, that's great. But if then there's one fiber being used, it's not really that important to us. Or at least important to you, I'd assume, because you're not trying to grow one, you're trying to grow like thousands, hundreds of thousands, all of them ideally. But this whole thing about volume is obviously the dosing of that stimulus. And it's no surprise that as we get more of those sets in, the amount of stimulus possible from each set is going to go down. Purely because half of that equation, the motor unit recruitment bit, is heavily reduced by fatigue. And so when we're gaining this fatigue in our workout, or maybe across workouts we're gaining fatigue, our motor unit recruitment's going down and we're able to get, well, not able, but we're getting less stimulus. And the interesting thing about this is when we have that prolonged, that sustained fatigue, it's going to be from set 1 of a workout, not set 5 when you've done all this volume here or whatever. It's actually the beginning of your workout that is being impacted too from that prolonged fatigue. And so, yeah, let's get into it. Obviously, with mechanical tension, this isn't something that just magically turns on, that magically happens. We need to be challenging the muscles. And what this kind of looks like is when we're doing a set, you'll notice that as you start getting closer to failure, where you can't perform another rep anymore, you're getting slower, the reps are grindier, and it's actually something that's challenging you. Now, that's going to be the area where we're actually experiencing enough mechanical tension to lead to some sort of growth. So if you're doing 30 sets a week or 20 sets a week, or the average 10 to 20 recommendation, and you're not seeing those reps in the majority of your sets, it essentially means that most of your work is warm-up sets. Because if you're not seeing those slow grindy reps or slower grindier reps, then you're not actually experiencing something that's going to lead to that stimulus. So that's kind of the first thing, right? Volume is not as simple as we do it and more and it's better. We've already explained that. But it's also not as simple as it being present and it being a good thing. We do need the volume we have to be effective volume, because we can have as much of it as possible, but if we're not actually getting effective ones in, and I'm not talking about when we start losing motor unit recruitment because of fatigue, I'm literally talking about the intensity we're bringing, the actual volume we're doing. If that's not high enough, it doesn't matter how many we do. So that's kind of obvious. It's kind of like a prerequisite of anything, you have to train hard. That's a basic of building muscle. But the other half of that, the fatigue that we might get, right? Stimulus exists. How are we going to talk about motor unit recruitment? How is this factored in? Well, that's really the bigger thing that pops up as what a volume recommendation is. And turns out how this ends up interacting with the whole thing is it's not really 10 to 20 sets a week anymore. Maybe if we're counting warm-up sets as actual volume, sure. I can very easily see 10 to 20 being the number. But if we're talking about actual sets where we're trying to go close to failure, and we're trying to get a stimulus in, we're looking at 10 being a ceiling. Truthfully, if you go break it down, the amount of fatigue that's being generated and the amount of diminishing returns that you're experiencing with additional sets, it is not the sort of way people typically imagine it, where we've got, let's say we've got 6 sets, we've got 6 circles, and each one is 1 unit of growth, and that's it. We've got 6 units of growth, and if we add a 7th set, that's going to be 1 more unit of growth, but percentage-wise, that's nowhere near as additional, return-wise, as going from 1 to 2 sets, because that would be doubling the stimulus, and here it's like an extra, what is it, 16.677, whatever, 6, I think it's 6 recurring, right? That might be what it is. 1/6, basically, percent more. That's how people typically view sets. That's how they view diminishing returns, and it's completely wrong. See, the way it actually works is, we've got set 1 here. This is a full unit of growth, let's say. This is all arbitrary. It's just to give you an analogy, basically. That set 1 has 1 full unit of growth. But then the second set cannot get 1 full unit of growth. It can get a fraction of that unit. It might be 2/3. It might be less than that. And as we're continuing to go along, the potential unit of growth is getting smaller and smaller and smaller incrementally. It is not diminishing in the sense that compared to what there was before, it's not that matter, but there's still the same amount of additional linear additional growth. It's not how it's working, unfortunately. But what this means is when we're picking volume, we kind of have to pay attention to the fatigue that something's going to generate, because the fatigue is always going to keep coming no matter what. There's no real way around that. But the stimulus is getting a lot less. Now, this isn't some Mike Mensa, go do 1 set a week for each muscle or whatever, and then up the frequency as you continue to get better or something like that. This is just explaining the truth, right? Because 10 to 20 can't recover from that. When you start getting past 8, it becomes very, very difficult. And don't get me wrong, I will run above 8 sets for a muscle, but I will only do that in specialization blocks where I'm like, I'm going to focus on my back at the moment, or I'm going to focus on my quads, my glutes, maybe my arms, and I'm going to give them more sets than I would typically recommend. But I'm going to stop, edging you on basically, and just not getting to the point of what the actual recommendation for volume is. So, how much volume should you be doing? Bearing in mind the way fatigue works, the way multi-unit recruitment works, the way you want to get the best possible gains, and maybe even push past a plateau if you've been stuck somewhere for a while. So, what I always say to people is 4 to 6 sets a week. And now when I say these sets, I'm talking about hard sets. Of course, it cannot be a warm-up set. We are not including anything without those. A little bit slower, a little bit more grindy reps. But if it's 4 to 6, we do want to see you being maybe 1 or 2 reps minimum away from failing. That's where you should be aiming to get to, and then you keep progressing, you keep adding weight, you keep adding reps to maintain that sort of intensity. But with 4 to 6 reps. And that's weekly. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but it does a lot more than you realize. And in fact, when I run specialization blocks, I will put muscles on way less than that, and they will steadily grow. They won't even atrophy. They will continue to grow and continue to get stronger and continue to build muscle, which you'd think would not even be possible. So you kind of have to actually go out there and see what it looks like when you up the intensity, when you reduce your volume, when you do have something which is at least 2x frequency, where you can take a look at your progressive overload and how much strength you've gained over a period of time and ask yourself, is this better than what I was doing before? Because oftentimes you'll find that the answer was yes, but more and more people are avoiding that and just adding sets because they think that that's going to be what gets them the results they want. The only real last thing I can give you is my newsletter. If you go down in the description, I hope if you've got to this place and you've enjoyed listening to me yap for 9 minutes and 40 seconds, then you will subscribe or have already subscribed or liked or commented or whatever. Something. The YouTube doesn't really matter to me when it comes to subscribing as much as that newsletter does. If you go down in the description, you'll see my newsletter. I post on there every single day, where I can give you a new lesson every single day, where you can look back, you can learn about everything and anything to do with training. And ultimately, that's the place where I build relationships with you, where I have you literally on an app on your phone, which is something that's possible. And I just get to keep teaching you and giving you good stuff that you might have never heard before. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you around.